As a nod here to those ancient builders, Michelangelo keeps the diameter, the width of St. Peter's just 1 meter less than that of the Pantheon. So this is 42 meters in diameter compared to 43 with the Pantheon. One step on the toes, if you like, of those ancient builders. Now, it's in the second inspiration that he takes that he decides to better the Guinness Book of Records just that little bit, and that is in comparison to the Dome of Florence. So, here's Michelangelo, a native of Florence, of course, growing up every day of his childhood would have been glimpsing at the fantastic dome there, built by Brunelleschi in the early 1400s. That's the breakthrough of Renaissance architecture. And then there's the gold ball, we can see. And then right above that, that's a little tricky because we're on the side view, but that's a cross. That's above the gold ball, and it's only the height of the cross that makes it taller than the Dome of Florence. So, you know, much like adding a TV antenna on top of a skyscraper or whatever, here's Michelangelo putting his name down in the record book. Still is the tallest dome in the world to this day. There's only a small handful of domes around the world that are larger by cubic volume, and they're all NFL football stadiums. So the Louisiana Superdome, home of the Saints, being the largest. So much like any other country, they've got many accoutrements, if you like, of a regular, fully functioning country. They've got, sure enough, their own radio station, they got their own train station, they got their own post office, their own fire brigade, their own military, very famous Swiss guards. There's about 150 of those guys, still all Swiss, born and trained to this day.
So they take care of their own fire protection?
Yep. Yeah, there's a couple you know, agreements, if you will, with the Republic of Italy, such as electricity and hydro water, but yeah, other than that, pretty much, you know, the city's pretty self-sustaining. You've only got about 800 citizens of the Vatican, so you've got... And then the third of this trio of larger-than-life figures, we've got Pope Leo X. He was a Medici, the famous family of bankers from Florence. They had a handful of popes in the family. Leo here, he was the youngest pope ever elected, 38 years old. Famous for the phrase, "God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." And enjoy it, he certainly did. Actually spent the Vatican into debt, funding his lifestyle. And one of his little party pieces was he had an elephant as a pet, and he kept him right here in this courtyard. So about 500 years ago, you had a white albino elephant wandering around the courtyard here. He was a gift from the rulers of Portugal in those days, all the way from India. Hanno the elephant, that's his name, that's the Wikipedia page. And his tusk is still in the Vatican treasury to this day. In the show, Cardinal della Rovere, who goes on to become the next pope, Julius II, a very famous warrior pope. He was known, they show him as kind of pious in the TV series. In actual reality, he was almost just as kind of notorious as Alexander. Not quite as scandalous per se, but just as politically astute. Not as pious as it were. So, here's the warrior Pope Julius, known for falling asleep during Mass, for instance. He is much more concerned about actually expanding the boundaries of the Papal States for tax revenue purposes. Known for leading his troops on horseback in a suit of armor into battle. Imagine the sight of this at this point now, relatively frail, gout-ridden, overweight 65-year-old Pope in a suit of armor, leading his troops on winter campaigns through the snows and mountains of Nemesis in the show, Cardinal della Rovere, who goes on to become the next Pope, Julius II, a very famous warrior Pope. He was known, they show him as kind of pious in the TV series. In actual reality, he was almost just as kind of notorious as Alexander. Not quite as scandalous per se, but just as politically astute. Not as pious as it were. So, here's the warrior Pope Julius, known for falling asleep during Mass, for instance. He is much more concerned about actually expanding the boundaries of the Papal States for tax revenue purposes. Known for leading his troops on horseback in a suit of armor into battle. Imagine the sight of this at this point now, relatively frail, gout-ridden, overweight 65-year-old Pope in a suit of armor, leading his troops on winter campaigns through the snows. So it'll come around again, you'll see where he derives his name, the globe within a globe, or sphere within a sphere. In this case, meant to represent the Vatican at the heart of the world. Although, it's kind of creaking and crumbling, I'm not sure what that's supposed to say. And there's a handful of these around the world. There's one in New York City, from the UN building, for instance. So I'm sure that's got its own take. There's one in Dublin, in front of the central courtyard there in the university. Now, I remarked, everything we're looking at 70 years. Oh, sorry, he lives into his late 70s. He's M for about 50 years. And what's kind of funny is his entire reign is spent trying to find a successor, because he doesn't have any natural-born sons himself. He's got one daughter, Julia. Poor Julia. She gets married off a handful of times to try to create grandsons. She responds to this manipulation by basically sleeping around with the entire city. Famous for having an orgy on the speaker's platform in the forum. All Augustus can do from his emperor's palace, kind of just shake his head at his daughter here. Finally, she gets exiled to the Amalfi Coast. Not too bad of an exile, huh? Finally, at the end of his 50 years, who's left but Tiberius is his stepson, who he had overlooked 50 years prior. He's been himself in retirement on the Amalfi Coast. He's in his 60s. He doesn't want to have to come back to Rome and run things. But there's no one else left, and so Tiberius comes in, and that's what they found, the Julio-Claudian dynasty. So you got the Julian side is the Caesar and Augustus family, and the Claudians is the step family. And so they have a handful of emperors who basically get more depraved and decadent as time goes along. Caligula, famous for making his horse a consul, finally end up with Nero, and he's kind of a sissy in those days. He isn't, the tough, manly Roman soldier that they like to think of themselves as. He, for instance, enjoys performing on stage in plays, particularly in female roles. So even as we go on to the days of, say, Shakespeare, to be an actor on stage was quite, seen as kind of not a high profession whatsoever. So here's Nero acting on stage in female roles, embarrassing the Roman people. Finally, he commits suicide in 68 AD because he knows the knives are out against him. And so for the first time, there's a succession crisis. It's the end of the Julio-Claudian age. Nero is the last guy in Roman history related to Caesar and Augustus. And so after him, for the rest of Roman history, there would be generals who take on the throne. So Hadrian, for instance, has a remark. He would have been a general. He was from Spain originally. Spoke with a Spanish accent in those days. Romans made fun of him because he seemed like this uneducated provincial.